Canada's Army will be getting new guns to replace the ones they've had for 35 years. It's a $307 million procurement deal with an initial order of 30,000 assault rifles from Colt Canada's factory in Kitchener, Ontario. Delivery is expected in early 2027. Canada's defense minister says this is an example of re-equipping the military through Canadian industry.
Because a sovereign munitions capability is about more than supply. It's about being autonomous for ourselves. It's really about standing on our own 2 feet.
Stephen Fuhr is the Secretary of State for Defense Procurement, and he joins me now. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Nice to see you too.
So we'll get to procurement, but I want to start with this Air Canada Express collision at New York LaGuardia's airport. You're a retired Air Force officer. You spent a lot of time in the aviation industry. Are you worried about air safety given some of the incidents we've seen in the skies and on the ground, especially in the U.S.?
I wouldn't say, I read the headline this morning just like many people did, and I don't know much more about it than the headline. It is unusual for a transport category aircraft to have a mishap like this at a major controlled airport. I'm not familiar with the weather conditions and all the other things that go into it, but I would say that flying is very safe and we should have confidence in our major carriers and our system.
All right, so you announced the procurement of about $300 million worth of firearms from Colt Canada to rearm the country's armed forces. These are replacing rifles that are about 35 years old. Tell me why you're making this purchase now, and will this help bulk up our reserves?
Yes, I think it will definitely do that. I met with the commander of the Army a number of months ago, and we went through all the priorities the Army had on the procurement side. There was a number of high priority items. This was one of those high priority items. And we moved quickly on it because it was identified as such. The reason this procurement, I think, is such a success story is because the speed in which we got it out the door. I'm hearing feedback from the Army is that we accelerated the procurement process by 2 years. The fact that it's made in Canada, the fact that the supply chain is 80% Canadian, all these things, it's what the military wanted. We got out the door faster, big Canadian content, employing Canadians in Southern Ontario. All these things matter, and I think it's a model for how we want to do things going forward.
Can you tell us how much the cost per rifle will be? We were having some trouble getting those details.
Well, we've only announced the first tranche of weapons, so I think it was 30,000 weapons for $307 million. Those are the only numbers that are out there in the public space. We're not going to price right now the second phase 2, which will be 4 years down the road right now, because a lot of things can happen in 4 years. I have no idea, what something today will cost 4 years from now. So we'll make sure that we get good value for the taxpayer when the time comes on phase 2. And then if, I know people do this, they take the number that we announced, which is $307 million divided by 30,000, they come up with a number in and around the $10,000 mark. But that includes a whole host of things that you don't see in the press release. Equipment, engineering support, accessories. There's a whole bunch of a back end that you don't see. So, I don't have a breakdown of what each individual component costs. I know that the forces got what they needed. I know that Denmark is buying 50,000 of these weapons too, so they also have confidence in this particular weapon and this particular company. And like I said, I think this is good news all around.
Let's discuss another procurement process. Of course, the fighter jets. Canada is reviewing its purchase of the F-35s from the American defense giant Lockheed Martin in light of course, the U.S. trade war. Sweden Saab is lobbying this country hard to buy the Gripen jets instead. Can you tell us where the government is at with the F-35 review? It was supposed to be done, I take it, by last summer. Maybe it was extended to September. Obviously, we're well past those dates now. What's the holdup here, sir?
Well, let me just tell you where we're at. We're on contract for 16 airplanes. They're being built right now down in Texas. There was an announcement not too long ago for long lead items on 14 more airplanes. So we haven't slowed anything down. The procurement is still under review, and the government hasn't taken a position yet. There's lots of things to think about, and when we have a final decision, the public will know which direction we're headed.
Does the government still see it as a bargaining chip in the negotiations with the U.S. over tariffs?
I'm not, that's Dominic LeBlanc, the Prime Minister. There's a bunch of people that are intimately involved in those discussions. I'm not one of those folks, so I can't really comment on it one way or the other.
I guess I'm just trying to get at why there is such a delay. You know, if it was supposed to be done by last summer, maybe September, you know, we're sitting here in March 2026. Like, can you give our audience a sense of why the government hasn't made a decision on the F-35s to this point?
I mean, I think the reason's self-evident. First of all, we haven't slowed anything down. I indicated to you what's happening, so we're still moving. We're living in a very dynamic space right now. The important thing here, and I think it's been said, well, I don't think I know, it's been said by the PM and the Minister of Defense, is that we get the decision right. So when we are ready to make a decision, we'll let the public know what that decision is and why when we're ready to do it.
So you've been in charge of defense procurement now for nearly a year. How would you describe the state of the military's equipment? Because, you know, I was looking through some old stories, and 2 years ago, CBC News reported that half of the equipment was unavailable or unserviceable. Is the country in a better position now? I still take it there's a ways to go, but has there been meaningful improvement?
Yeah, there has been meaningful improvement. On the serviceability side that you just cited, yeah, I've heard the same numbers, and I've seen it. I've visited a number of our bases, and I'm familiar with serviceability on existing equipment, regardless of its age, is low. Primarily, that's a result of lack of investment. So what will help that immensely is just a bigger investment from the capital side, you know, buying spare parts, energizing the supply chain that we have right now to make sure the stuff that we own is serviceable more often. So we're confident that'll be the case. And then on buying new things, we're moving at speed that we haven't seen in a long time. I mean, the DIA, the Defense Investment Agency, has only been up and running realistically for a number of months. If you take out the House winds down middle of December to the end of January, you know, a month and a half before that, and you know, 2 months after, and we've announced Global 6500 replacement for the Challenger, strategic partnership with Telesat MDA for mill-grade SATCOM, CMAR. We had another really great space announcement with MDA on observation of space domain awareness. So we're moving files a lot faster. There's still lots of work to do, but I think we're demonstrating very, very early that we can push things out the door effectively, faster, bring Canadian investment and Canadian businesses into the tent in a better way, and make sure that the military gets what it needs in a timely fashion, which is exactly why we put together the DIA in the first place.
With every announcement, it seems the government is replacing equipment that's decades old, you know, sometimes Cold War era hardware that's on its last legs. I take your point, you're making some progress. But do you think, you know, should Canadians be concerned about the military's ability to protect this country given the sorry state of some of this equipment?
No, I mean, we do have good equipment. I mean, some of it's older than others, like depending on what particular thing that you want to take a look at. It needs to be serviceable. People need to be trained correctly on it, and it needs to be available to them, and we need new stuff. So all these things matter, and you know, as far as I'm concerned, my primary role is to make sure we get the Canadian Armed Forces what they need when they need it. And while I'm doing that, make sure that we bring Canadian industry and Canadian companies and Canadian workers into the tent the best we can. And I think, you know, based on what I just said and we talked about just a minute ago, we're already demonstrating very, very early in this process that we're doing that.
I know you are the Secretary of State for Defense Procurement. You're not the Minister of National Defense, so I won't hold you to this, but I'd like to ask for an update on Canada and its allies and what they might be able to do with the Strait of Hormuz. Last week, the government said it's ready to contribute. What can you tell us? What's under consideration by the government here?
I think I'm going to refer to what you just said, and I'll let you have a discussion with Minister McGuinty next time he's on your program. I'm going to stay in my lane and continue to do my role here, and I'll let the minister speak for what Canada may or may not do moving forward.
You are on the NATO Parliamentary Committee. You obviously have some experience dealing with our allies on this. Do you think there's a role for the alliance in this conflict in the Middle East?
I mean, NATO's a defensive organization, right? And we have allies in the region. So, you know, what Canada does vis-a-vis this particular conflict moving forward will be up to NATO to decide, and whether Canada wants to participate or not. Again, we have allies in the area. We have people on the ground nearby. So obviously looking after our people and making sure our allies are protected would be probably where we're going to start thinking about things.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Stephen Fuhr, Secretary of State for Defense Procurement. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.